How do I look? Look away, ladies. This next one might prove irresistible. Yes! Disco Elysium is a wonderful game, but before there was a game, there was a board game. But before there was a game, and after there was a board game, there was a book. The Sacred and Terrible Air. It's a book written by Robert Kurvitz, the main mastermind behind Disco Elysium, and especially, you know, the world and everything. And today we're gonna talk about it. This book is a very interesting work of art that went largely unnoticed at the time of release. If you haven't read the book, I do recommend visiting the link in the description and at least attempting to read it. It's definitely worth your time, especially if you've played the game. It doesn't involve any of the main characters from the game, but it does span a similar timeline. You could say the story of the book is happening in parallel and around the story of the game, slightly before and slightly after. There are certain actions and circumstances, without spoiling anything, that would certainly affect the game characters' lives in Revachol. You know, if you want to fill out the larger world of Disco Elysium, I definitely recommend reading this book. This is the short and long recommendation. This recommendation aside, I'm gonna spoil the whole book. We're gonna go through the whole plot of the book from the beginning to the end. In Disco Elysium, the protagonist's amnesia serves as a very convenient plot device to kind of help you acclimate yourself in this dance world. But in the book, no such plot device exists, so you're kind of thrust into the thick of it. This book has a non-linear narrative, so for the sake of this video, I'm gonna linearize it. I'm going to tell you what happens in the book, but in chronological order. Okay, so it's kind of easier to understand. Really quickly, before jumping into the game's plot, let's talk about the context of the book's creation. The author, Robert Kurvitz, wrote the book roughly between 2008 and 2013, being in his mid-20s. Back in those days, the Zaum Cultural Association hasn't yet become the game studio that we know. It was mostly a conglomeration of artistically active Estonian youths with rather alternative political views. You know, just making art together. Most of what is known about the creation of the book comes from the blog of Martin Luiga, one of the founders of Zaum and a close colleague of Robert Kurvitz. The world of Elysium itself started to develop from a more traditional fantasy-themed D&D campaign. Kurvitz as the DM and Luiga and Argo Tulik got a bit tired of elves and decided to spice things up with communism. And then Robert Kurvitz decided to bring the world of Elysium from the medium of tabletop RPGs into one of literature, and later, of course, a video game. Martin Luiga was helping as an advisor and editor, and he provided some additional canon lore dumps on his blog, which are appended to the book by the translators. Speaking of which, the book's original language is Estonian, and as of 2024, the author himself has not issued any official translation. But given the huge impact of Disco Elysium, the game, it's no surprise that the fanbase came up with a translation of their own. Both Truri and the translation team and GroupIbex did an amazing job in 2023, 10 years, mind you, after the release of the book. And you can find the links to both translations in the description below, like I said. Genre-wise, the novel may be classified in a broad sense as science fiction. Kurvitz himself defines the book as Scandinavian noir. It also appears to be influenced by literature of the slipstream genre, which we will discuss later. And one more thing to keep in mind, this book was supposed to have sequels. While it does work as a standalone piece of art, the book's greatest mysteries are left virtually unresolved by the time you flip the last page. So, the plot. Let's finally look at the book's contents. I'm so fucking tired of sitting here, Jesus Christ. One last thing, this is not an advertisement, but if you like my channel and you want to support me somehow, consider checking out my music. I have several musical projects, some of them are on the screen right now. There are links in the description as well. Just check them out, listen to them, that will make me really happy and help me out. Thank you. The book conveys its story through two main timelines. The first main plotline is set in the years 51 and 52, pretty much within the same time frame as the Disco Elysium game. And the second main plotline captures the years 72 and beyond, so the characters appear in both young and aged versions. Let's recap the geography of Elysium first. Most of the world, which may or may not be a planet, is covered in the Pale, a mysterious milk-white mist with some rare clearings known as isolas. Each Isola roughly corresponds to our real Earth parts of the world. Mundi Isola mostly translates to Western Europe, Grad to Eastern Europe, Russia and Siberia, and the Isola of Katla, the one our story is set in, has its counterpart in Scandinavia and the Baltics. Life's pretty good here in the 50s, as the world's revolutions are long the subject of history. Our main characters are a trio of regular young teenagers that attend a middle school in the Catalan city of Vasa. Tarish, a bold and brash individual, an immigrant to Vasa and the team's party face. Jesper, an inventive and stylish young man, a collected and somewhat withdrawn individual. And Han, also an immigrant, somewhat nerdy and clumsy, but enormously erudite and well-read sweetheart. The guys are pretty lovable from the beginning. They are most likely based on the earliest members of Zaum Cultural Association. Tarish plays the role of a charismatic leader, having František the Brave, a folk hero from Grad, as a role model and inspiration. Jesper, on the other hand, is much more hesitant and somewhat aloof. He's a ruminating type, whose character unfolds later in the story. And Han is obsessed with all sorts of stories that involve mysterious disappearances, unresolved enigmas, and paranormal cases. He largely lives in his own world, but occasionally tells an enthralling story or two. The boys' dynamics are such as you would expect from a clique of young punks. Their trust and friendship for each other is immense, which doesn't mean, of course, it goes without conflicts. But what unites the boys especially is their lust for the girls, the school's most enticing and alluring young ladies, the Lund sisters, Charlotte, Malin, and Annie. There's also little May, who doesn't go to school yet because she's too little. The girls are daughters of wealthy parents, their mother being a minister of education in Katla. We first get acquainted with our heroes on top of a gorgeous hill by the seaside, where they hide in the bushes and stalk the girls with binoculars as they're sunbathing on the beach. The boys are pretty clumsy and they inevitably get caught, but they all laugh it off, and all 7 of them proceed to have a nice picnic on top of the hill. The book spares no effort to describe in meticulous detail how gorgeous and tempting those girls are to our heroes. Although the text focuses extensively on physical description, it also makes us understand that there's way more to the boys' desire than just a teenage lust. There's a peculiar birthmark on the back of one of the sisters, Annie, which has a shape of a delicate constellation. While observing it, sneaky Jesper obtains one of her hairbands and keeps it as a trinket. Remember this, it will be important later in the story. The picnic scene is lighthearted and childishly naive, despite our growing suspicion that the girls, who clearly enjoy the enormous attention they get, might also be up to something. And it quickly becomes apparent that our suspicions are well deserved when the girls suddenly suggest to our enamored heroes to do some dope. Of course, the girls don't have it themselves, so they ask the speechless Tarish, Jesper, and Han to buy it from a well-known drug dealer and school bully called Ziggy. Ziggy is a complex character who is kind of minor at the beginning, but he receives a stunning development throughout the novel and becomes a fully fledged alternative main character in the book's second half. In this school days timeline, Ziggy is a nihilist punk with utterly radical views on pretty much everything. Known as the worst boy in school, Ziggy frequently expresses hatred for the authority and wealth, which he doesn't miss the opportunity to passionately deem bourgeois. And so our devoted heroes collect all the lunch money they have to buy some drugs from Ziggy. And it's not like any street dope would satisfy the princess's needs. The girls specifically crave the special drug, the infamous cherry speed. By the way, the girl's last name, Lund, translates from Estonian to snow, or cocaine, which can suggest the sisters' light skin tone, but also how alluring and potentially dangerous they are to our heroes. So let's take a look at this cherry speed drug, as its origin is actually pretty important to the world's lore. When the revolution failed in 08, 44 years before the events of the book, the communist leader Krab Zmazov allegedly committed suicide, while his right-hand commander, Ignus Nielsen, took the remaining army from the siege Grad to the Isola of Samara, which corresponds to real-world socialist Asia. The coalition, the capitalist war force that brought the revolution down, clearly had the upper hand and was rumored to even have nuclear weapons in its possession. One of the figures closest to Ignus Nielsen was the mathematician Ion Rodionov. Little is revealed about Rodionov's endeavors, but it is known that he was the leading expert in the study of the Pale, and after the revolution abated, he continued his obscure experiments. It is rumored that his ultimate goal was to produce some sort of super weapon, so that the communists have some answer to the coalition's nukes. The nature of this alleged weapon is extremely obscure, but one can get an impression that it is connected to erasing certain parts of reality from history so that they never existed. Absolute negation, as it's referred to in the text. Connected to Rodionov is another obscure concept, which goes by the name of Rodionov Deep, which is presumably some special central place deep inside the Pale. All those things are going to be crucial for the novel's finale, but what's important for now is that as a byproduct of Rodionov's experiments came to exist some special pale saturated drug known by its street name Cherry Speed. Let's get back to our heroes. On the day our boys meet the girls, flamboyant Tarish makes the girls laugh all the time with intentionally goofy compliments. The guys are nervous, and the most doubtful of them three is Jesper. The boys actually force themselves to drink some cheap beer before the meeting for courage. As the girls lead them to the beach and lay on the sand, Han suddenly captures everyone's attention by retelling an ancient legend. It is a tale of Emperor of Samara, who, 1,000 years ago ordered his men to find the Peach of Immortality. 1,000 warriors never returned and got lost without a trace, either frightened by their emperor's rage in case of failure or simply taken by the relentless Pale. On the glossy cover of the girls' magazine, like an abacus, 12 gems stand in a row. There were originally 24. Charlotte took one, Annie took one, Jasper took one, and Han took one more. Therese took 2. Let's count. The 6 of the kids take drugs, and what follows is poetically referred to as a chemical marriage. The narrative style here becomes even more vague and disjointed to underline the psychedelic effects. The kids split in pairs. Therese is dancing with a half-naked Charlotte, Jasper takes Annie for a short walk, during which they share a single once-in-a-lifetime kiss, and Han is sitting by Malin's side, as the girl clearly overdoses. This acid trip scene feels like the key to the later episodes and the ways the world of Elysium works. Getting overdosed with the Pale will most probably have dire consequences, as you can imagine. The descriptions of Malin's condition are full of epithets and metaphors connected to a childbirth, pregnancy, and inside-the-body imagery. Here's a passage that's been included into virtually every Reddit theory about this novel. She digs her nails into her palms, feeling how they snap immediately. It doesn't fit inside her. Hormones are already distorting her sliding body. The pelvic basin has expanded into a birth canal, and unbearable well-being throbs deep in her hips. In the grave of her body fluids, a tiny homunculus closes its needle-sized eyes. The creature curled up in a half circle opens its mouth to scream, but nothing is heard, not a single sound. It has never been here. This passage is the pinnacle of the novel's vagueness, and chances are some of the original meaning has been lost in translation. It allows for multiple readings, both literal and metaphorical. Let's not overthink it at the moment and just take for a fact that something bad and unexplained happens to Malin during the trip. This night changes our heroes forever, and as the 6 youngsters bid farewell at the crack of dawn, the girls promise they'll meet again after they return from some upcoming 2-day trip with their parents. What happens next is the trigger for the entire second plotline of the novel, and the whole story with the beach and the drugs serves as a mere background to the real drama. Because, as you might have guessed, the girls never meet the guys again. And the funny thing is that this is revealed literally in the first sentence of the novel. You can easily imagine what impact it had on the protagonist and the society around them. The entire city goes bananas, a wild wave of loony conspiracies and rumors follows. The police is unable to find any credible evidence, the parents of the disappeared sisters are paralyzed by the shock. The book's story is a story of a disappearance case, and also a story of being unable to come to terms with it, live through the loss and trauma, and find the inner power to move on. And at moving on, our heroes fail miserably. Therese, Jasper, and Han organize their own investigation and collect every tiny bit of information they can. After a while, a mysterious letter appears out of nowhere, presumably written in Annie's handwriting. It reads, "Everything's fine. We're with a man. We love him." The handwriting expertise is claimed to be 95% accurate. The public, however, is not convinced, and gradually, month by month, year by year, people accept the fact of the disappearance. Except for our heroes, of course. And Ziggy, who is on his own solo adventure, but more on that in a minute. A big time skip follows. Our heroes part ways and evolve in their separate paths. They are now mature. The disappearance case defined the entire adult life of Han. Already massively interested in enigmas and mysteries, our erudite young man takes a deep dive into the world of conspiracies. And as a grown-up, he is now a self-proclaimed world's leading expert on disappearing. He researches other famous cases, including the semi-legendary story of a traveler in mystic Ramaut Karzai, who is believed to embark on a journey to Corpus Mundi, the highest known mountain in Elysium, presumably to plead an audience with God. Another famous case, chronologically closer to our main timelines, happened some 150 years prior in Grad. It is Elysium's version of a Victorian era, and the public celebrates the launch of a new airship, the pinnacle of engineering at the time. Named after a popular opera diva, Nadia Harnoncourt, this commercial passenger airship was supposed to travel safely through the Pale to other Isolas. Expectedly, it got lost in the Pale on its maiden trip, with a whole lot of people on board. The public at the time had forgotten the disaster rather quickly, and the interest in the case reignited only in the 50s with the rise of the disappearance enthusiasts like Khan. These geeks pay a special attention to the photo of the airship's launch, where the excited crowd waves and looks up to a great nothingness. The airship seems to disappear not only from a physical reality, but also from the photos, documents, as well as the witnesses' memories. Han is obviously obsessed with this story, to a degree that he buys a replica model of the ship and keeps it in a glass case in his room, the basement of his mother's house. Yep, Han is an overweight, unemployed 35-year-old that collects miniatures, reads fanfiction, and lives with his mother. He also contacts a famous antique collector, Saryan Ambartsumyan, but we'll get to that. What about Jesper? During the time skip, Jesper has managed to become a famous interior designer, welcomed by the Bohemian society. He dresses sharply and lavishly, does surfing, attends dinners at expensive restaurants. He also does drugs. Of course he does. Jesper dates a lingerie model who's barely of age, the kind that gets printed on huge billboards. Her name is Anita Landquist, and it's clear as day Jesper projects heavily his unresolved trauma connected to a forever young, in his mind, Annie Lund. What about Therese? Well, Therese becomes a police officer and an alcoholic who has spontaneous outbursts of uncontrollable anger, abuses his police status and his access to weapons and mind-altering substances, who also longs for a long-lost love of his life and builds paranoid theories around it. The guys meet after a long break during a school class reunion. After the reunion, Jesper takes Therese and Han to a bar, where the guys talk pretty much the same way they did 22 years ago. Their social statuses, of course, have changed, and all that could be said about the linchpin topic, the girl's disappearance, had already been said. Except, Jesper actually has some fresh news. He tells the rest that an acquaintance of his, a movie director, is making a new satire documentary, a film about none other than Vidkun Hird. Now, Vidkun Hird is a murderous fascist white supremacist convict, who despite being imprisoned continues to be a popular media figure with a cult following. His name, Vidkun, is also a name of a guy who ruled Norway under Nazi occupation. Vidkun Hird is interviewed by the documentary director, and alongside his regular fanatic bullshit, he also unexpectedly hints at his involvement with the Lund sister story. He draws the constellation-shaped birthmark from Annie Lund's back on a piece of paper, then grins villainously and refuses to elaborate further. Jesper actually displays the interview's recording on the screen. The guys are horrified and grossed out, not only due to the maniac's speech, but also because of a long before established conclusion that the fascist murderer Vidkun Hird had not a single chance to be connected with the girl's case. But how does this new knowledge influence their understanding of the case? Therese has an idea. The following night, he kicks open the prison's door, assaults Vidkun Hird, and proceeds to forcefully access Hird's memories by using a highly unstable psychedelic device known as Zaum. The book once again chooses a highly blurred and diffused narrative style, and the details about the Zaum device's mode of operation are never fully explained, but it kinda blends the user's memories together with the ones of the subject. So Therese manages to learn that Vidkun Hird had never actually seen the Lund sisters, and the birthmark pattern was shown to him by some other figure, who goes by the name of Derek Trentmüller. Derek Trentmüller, aka Linoleum Salesman, is a sadistic pedophile who has been following the Lund sisters throughout the entirety of the School Days plotline. He follows them on a tramway, he watches them on the beach, and he even takes photos of the sisters on a picnic with the guys from his top-floor hotel room. And as Derek Trentmüller is about to finally commit to his kidnapping, the girls mysteriously disappear a day before that. And that's the point where he goes even more insane. His personality becomes not only split, but his maniacal half actually gets dominated by the one that believes that the girls never even existed in the first place. They are somehow erased from all of his photos, much like the Harnankor airship. And this is just too much mindfuckery one's mind can handle. Derek Trentmüller now lives in a nursing home. While Therese is having a Zaum hangover and fabricating fake identities so that his colleagues from the police have a hard time arresting him for power abuse, Jesper and Han share a moment in Han's basement. Han lives off the salation money left from his father, who died in an accident. Han demonstrates the gem of his collection, the airship model, when a phone call from Therese interrupts the display and urges the guys to the nursing home. The guys use Zaum on the senile and paralyzed Trentmüller and learn his story. Therese is not okay now. The mind-reading device has blended too much foreign memories into his mind, and his personality is now all shaky. Jesper takes them to his place to rest. His model girlfriend is absent, as she visits her sister in Revachol, and then Revachol gets nuked. Yep, so it goes. We'll get to that. Anita, Jesper's girlfriend, returns to Vasa a day before the bombing, and somehow doesn't know anything about it. The guys take some time to form a new plan. Political conflicts that have been building up through the 22 years we skipped are finally in their hot phase. The Republic of Mesk declared war on everyone, and everyone is now at war with everyone else. And also, the Pale is now not just passive-aggressive like it used to be, but just plain aggressive, and it is actively eating up a prior habitable landmass. So there's an apocalypse going on. It feels like the Elysium's inhabitants have always been vaguely aware that one day it will start knocking at their doors. The guys kind of brush off the nuclear bombing and the New World War. So for now, our heroes have to come up with a new plan. The guys decide to split. Jesper meets their former classmate, Ollie, who confesses that he forged the Malin letter 22 years ago in an attempt to console the public. He also mentions that he was given Malin's diary to copy the handwriting from by none other than Ziggy. It turns out Ziggy and Malin probably dated. I would not rush to conclude right away that Ziggy is the cause of Malin's imagined pregnancy, But yeah, there's that. There are frequent flashes into Ziggy's lore at this point. He breaks the window into the Lund's father cabinet with a brick, escapes the chase, assaults a trash box, gets drunk, does dope, gets into a fight, and ends up in a pile of snow, where he is met by supposedly Malin, who he refers to as My Doom, while she to him is the worst boy in school. At some point, Malin gives him a mixtape. The tape is labeled with a girl's cursive handwriting, Ziggy's Drive to the End of the World mixtape. When the disc starts spinning, the little heart over the last I of the name Ziggy stays in the middle of everything. Ziggy has his own separate quest. He is likewise obsessed with the sisters, arguably even more than the guys. He links their disappearance to the pail, and he's aware of its memory-negating effect. Ziggy has a unique gift, never explained in the novel, but it turns out Ziggy can actually walk in the pail without losing his mind like everyone else seems to eventually do. Recall the pail driver from the game. So Ziggy can walk through the pail-covered lands, which is precisely what he's doing after simulating his legal death. He also buys another Harnoncourt airship replica from the antique collector. He travels the pail in search of Radionov Deep, the alleged heart of the pail, for reasons never explained. He has tattoos with girls' ages on his knuckles. 5, 12, 13, and 14. And at some point, he meets the spirit of Ignas Nielsen, the communist second leader right after Krasmazov. The two have lengthy philosophical discussions about various joys of life, in particular, communism. During the school days plotline, Ziggy gave Malin's diaries to Ollie. Ollie forged the letter, and now Jesper knows about it, but that doesn't really help. Meanwhile, Therese and Han embark on a journey to the edge of the world to meet someone known as Self-Chiller. Imagine if this guy was actually a recluse and had extraordinary powers to predict the location of the corpses belonging to the people that's been lost to the Pale, and that would be Self-Chiller. So they race against time to the remote forest hut where Self-Chiller lives, and their lengthy trip involves running counter to the evacuating car masses on insane speed, consuming unhealthy amounts of alcohol and listening to tons of Finnish slurs, and techno music. What the guys managed to learn from Self-Chiller, shortly before the Pale engulfs him along with the hut and a big portion of Katla's landmass, is that Self-Chiller cannot actually predict the location of the sisters' bodies, which should supposedly mean that they are not dead, but it doesn't necessarily prove that they're alive. The three men reunite in the house of Anne Margaret Lund, the girl's mother. The world erasing the evidence of their existence is apparent now. Photos are weirdly empty, the mother doesn't speak about her kids, and even her body seems to grow younger. The evidence of her ever giving birth is erased as well. The guy's stubbornness as well as Ziggy's quest are the only reasons the world even remembers the Lund sisters now. The girl's mother is apathetic to the guys' claims and requests to reopen the police investigation. She already forgot and moved on, so the guys leave the Lund house with no success. We now enter the third act of the novel, in which the events are hazy and sometimes feel like a build-up for a sequel. The narration now jumps between the guys, who decide to embark on their final journey to Grad to find Ziggy themselves, as he's basically the only lead they now have, and Ziggy, who is endlessly walking in the Pale and talking to ghosts. Therese, Jesper, and Han get on a magnet train to the Gradisola, to the megapolis of Mirova. Before they bid farewell to the city of their childhood, our heroes make their last preparations before their final one-way trip. Jesper leaves his partner, Anita. The elusive possibility to finally get an answer to whatever has taken Annie Lund from his world now captures Jesper entirely. He had been keeping Annie's hairband in a small ring box for all this time. The box which Anita of course finds and treats as an indication of an inevitable proposal. As they fight, Anita is devastated, perplexed, and confused, which deepens tenfold as Jesper shouts the recent news about the Revachol bombing and the beginning of the war, which Anita had not heard about. It is painful to read as the relationships between characters sever, just like the ones between the world's states and formal political alliances. Han as well has some unfinished business in Vaasa. I mentioned already that 2 years before the class reunion, Han contacted the antique collector Ambartsumyan regarding the newly purchased replica of the airship. The collector reveals that after the original ship disappeared, they produced a model to display in the museum in Grad, and that this original model was taken to Samara by the retreating communists, namely mathematician Ion Rodionov. And aside from the museum one, there are 3 replicas, one in Han's possession, and the other 2 used to belong to the antique collector, one of which mysteriously disappeared, and the other was sold to Ziggy 10 years before that call. Ambartsumyan gives Han a key to his collection archive in Mirova in Grad, in exchange for the last accessible airship replica. All that is extensively discussed during the guys' lengthy magnet train trip. This is sadly the last time in the novel we see our protagonists joyful and delighted by having each other at their side. Because as soon as they set their feet on Mirova soil, Therese is surrounded by the international police. He is shot in the leg and taken away on an ambulance helicopter. Jesper and Han manage to avoid the firefight and hide. Therese is arrested for power abuse and using Zaum on Herd and Trent Muller. At the hospital, he is approached by the police investigator, and at this point it becomes clear that our former international collaboration police agent Therese Maciejek was sold. He was sold by his friend Han, Han in exchange for some yet unknown, but no doubt precious intel. Tarish is not at all upset about it. There are reasons to think he was at least partially aware of Han's plan. For what it's worth, the story is over for our fellow agent. Han visits the luxury apartment where Abart Sumyan had amassed his collection. As he gets there with the sent-along key, he finds a crushed to smithereens window pane and piles of snow that are now covering the glass of the display boxes. In this trashed apartment of the collector, he finds a map to Rodionov Deep. At the bottom of the display case gleams the grand prize, Rodionov's Deep. The perforated dark blue metal sheet sings like a saw blade between his fingers, the city's light shining through thousands of dots. From the police, Han gets a folder with Ziggy's data, as well as some fake papers that should help him keep a low profile. This part of the book is especially abstruse, but we know for a fact that our world's leading expert on disappearing, Inyat Khan, is now fully equipped for his final quest, which it seems was planned for the sequel novel. It leaves the impression that a race is now set up between Han and Ziggy to Rodionov Deep, which still by the last page remains an unexplained pseudo-real location. Han calls his mother for the last time, and the quest that awaits Han will be a lonely one, since even before the episode with the collector's apartment, Han and Jesper part ways, and our fellow interior designer Jesper Delagardie decides to live the remainder of his short time in a remote cabin in the taiga forest, the eyes the exact color of which he can no longer recall, a face that he can no longer remember, a kiss with the teacher's daughter in the dim forest which the tongue doesn't remember, but without which he himself would be inconceivable. All of it fades away. A former interior designer opens his mouth, rubs his bleeding gums with powder, and throws the rest of the nose candy into the burning motor carriage. The novel concludes in a fluffed-up tale of small vignettes, among which we see Han that walks among the city ruins and suffers from the nightmares in which a squall of girls' hysterical voices beg him to give up. Han also manages to visit Ziggy's father, old and drunk nihilist who devalues even the nihilism that has led the world of Elysium to its miserable end. The way Robert Kurvitz and other people that contributed to this book synthesize real-world events and figures is interesting in its own right. Some of them are fairly on the surface, like Karamazov being kind of this blend of Karl Marx and Lenin and some other guy that fucking killed himself in a bunker. But some of them are only theories. I can't claim that they're 100% true, but they're interesting nonetheless. The very name of the Zaum Cultural Association is a sort of reference in itself. Zaum was a poetical movement or a poetical practice that existed in Russia around the time of the Communist Revolution. You can kind of interpret the word Zaum to mean something like overly smart. It basically rejected the traditional norms of any language, and to somebody who's not acquainted with the practice, it basically sounds like complete gibberish. It's never been a secret that a big chunk of Elysium's world building is directly taken and inspired by the works of the famous Soviet science fiction writers, the Strugatsky brothers. This dangerous and mysterious fog that covers parts of the world is a setting of their novel that's called Roadside Picnic, which is, by the way, the novel on which the movie and the games Stalker are based on. Another example is the name Dolores Day, which seems to me a reference to a title of another Strugatsky novel, It's Hard to Be God, a theme of which is very similar to the Elysium's concept of the Innocences. Another obvious place to look for references and inspirations is the setting of Planescape, the whole idea of which revolves around belief systems and pushing concepts into existence with the power of mind and reasoning. A keen eye may also notice some nods to modernist writer Vladimir Nabokov, who's also kind of known for this rich referential style and tons of interesting wordplay and language puns. His most famous novel is, of course, the provocative Lolita. Just take a look at these two excerpts here, one from The Secret and Terrible Air and the other from Lolita. A PDF file, a girl's disappearance, an inability to move on from childhood trauma. Kurvitz doesn't really hide the references. Instead, he decides to embrace these literature tropes and grow from them his own independent story. Also, a little known fact is that Nabokov in his later years also tried some science fiction world building type of shit in his novels, such as Ada or Pale Fire, excerpts from which were used, by the way, in the Blade Runner movie. Another classic in the spirit of Zaum that's referenced in the Disco Elysium is George Luis Borges, or whatever the fuck his name is.
Jorge Luis Borges.
An Argentinian writer whose novels and short stories famously introduce myriads of imaginary worlds. There are also tons of music references and lyrics of real-world songs directly in the text. One notable one is an early 2000s song called Gourmandises by a famous French singer, Alizé. Alizé. I don't fucking... whatever. According to Martin Luiga's blog post, their music video served as direct inspiration for the Loon Sisters plotline. Some events and characters in the game of Disco Elysium can also be connected. The harbor strikes are Polish strikes of 1977. The character of Glacier to the character of Katie from the 1973 postmodernist novel Gravity's Rainbow. And of course, Kim Kitsuragi obviously is the reincarnation of everybody's favorite Kitsuragi Misato. Some of these may be a stretch, I admit it, but it's very interesting to find the themes and characters of the game in their embryonic state in the novel, and kind of the whole connection, the inspiration, everything fucking, it all kind of comes together, you know. It's very interesting. As we've already seen, most characters' arcs involve in some way the themes of obsessiveness, nihilism, failure to move on. There are plenty of things to dissect here, but we shouldn't plunge right into the depths of conspiracies, because clearly the themes of the books are larger than the text itself. And considering we never got a sequel that was clearly planned, a lot of our deductions about the message of Sacred and Terrible Air should be taken with a grain of salt. At the same time, the main core, bare-bones message of the book is fairly straightforward and clear. Despite its tangled way of presenting it. The scenes of unforgotten affection, the world becoming indifferent, time being relentless, hopes for a better future being baseless. All of those speak for themselves, and anybody with a naked eye can see the author's commentary on our real-world tendencies. In Disco Elysium, there's a character called Tiago, and his place in the plot is quite minor, but the philosophical vastness of his dialogue is quite immense. Tiago lives in the Church of Dolores Day, and he's addicted to this unexplained phenomenon, this hole in time and space, probably connected to the Pale, this place of absolute silence. He's a former alcoholic who's now worshipping this addictive oblivion, which seems a clear substitution of one addiction to another. While not a one-to-one correspondence, the character of Tiago shares a lot of similarities with how Therese, Jesper, Han, Ziggy sacrifice all of their former lives in an attempt to reach this unreachable goal. While the protagonists are at times pretty lovable, they are ultimately losers. They fail to let go, they fail to change on a deeper level, and they fail to grow up. This might be interpolated to the scale of humanity, and might be a warning to those whose lives are defined by these promises of ideas and ideologies of the past, which are these fake, ghost-like memories of that one sunny day, or that first kiss in school, or communism. In the novel, there are signs of things being not all bad. Obviously, it's not like a self-help cure your depression type book, but it's also not a we are all 100% doomed apocalypse book. An example of the latter might be something like Anna Kavan's book, Ice. In this grim novel, the world is dying and the unstable narrator is looking for this anemic and fragile woman of his fantasies. But it's much, much more grim, and the book's author was also struggling with heroin addiction and deep depression. And in comparison, the messages of Kurvitz's book seem almost cheerful. The books are also very similar in style, Ice being credited as a genre-defining book in slipstream fiction, which is known as a genre often described as the fiction of strangeness. The main literary device there being a disjointed, dreamlike narrative. The term slipstream is even mentioned in the game. There's a short chapter written from the perspective of a character called Ambrosius Saint Miro, which I didn't touch on in the plot summary. This character claims to be the new innocence, the manifestation of the world's tendency, and the harbinger of great change. Dolores Day, the most notable innocence of the past, introduced the technology that allowed traveling the Pale, so, you know, people of Elysium generally love her. There is another innocence named Sola, who's kind of known as an anti-innocence due to their inactivity and passiveness, especially in trying times like the times of the revolution. That bit of lore indicates the indifference that grows within the people, and this void is now filled with a new narrative, with a new voice, a harbinger of destruction, a voice that calls himself Saint Miro. This figure is the one behind the New World War, the encroaching of Pale, and the nuking of Revachol. Yeah, by the way, if you didn't know, in Disco Elysium, the game, there is a hidden shivers check that foreshadows Revachol's demise. So, of course, there are some Reddit theories of whether Harriet Dubois somehow will be the hero that saves the world. By the way, if you feel like you really want a deep dive into the theories about the Pale, I place some of my favorite ones in the description. Among them, the famous analysis of the fantastic Jamrock Hobo, Elysium's lore scholar. But once again, this lore layer is essential to the world building, but it's barely touched on in the novel, and there's zero mention of Saint Miro in the game. The reason I speak about the bright, optimistic side is largely due to the fact that the story is not over yet. And maybe that's part of the message of the art, but maybe we'll get more Elysium content in the future. The character of Ziggy is linked to how this indifference and nihilism and the Pale itself can be countered. There's a very brief scene in the novel when the spirit of Ignis Nelson zealously rants about the communist fellowship and the trust people had to one another in the old days. And the Pale itself retreats for a second, and the color creeps into the world like a threat. A sentiment like that can be found both in the novel and in the game, and it's no doubt very important to the game's authors, which are well known for their left-wing views. There are hints in the game about an upcoming uprising in Revachol, Les Raideurs, as they call it, in the city of Revachol. So maybe that somehow factors in to this potentially positive outcome. Anyway, what actually happens at the end of the book? What is Hans' plan? Why did Jesper leave him exactly? Is there some way to save the world? It's not even clear if the girl's disappearance is caused by the cherry speed overdose, Malin's pregnancy, or some other thing, you know. In the closing sequence, the book refers to Malin specifically as the mirror of the world. Malin Lund steps onto the ground floor on the carpet. In the dark room, a shattered window glows. The curtain swells like a sail, a brick lies on the floor, and the entrance door is open. She herself is a mirror. Mirror! A perfect copy of the world. But something is wrong. It always has been. Her surface is flawless, like that of an adolescent, radiantly pure. It is the light that is mistaken. It is the world itself. There's no telling if the book didn't exist, whether or not there would be created eventually the game of Disco Elysium. As I mentioned in the beginning, the book was not any commercial success, and after its release, according to Kurvitz himself, it made him succumb to a deep alcoholism. In the year after the publication, Kurvitz published an epilogue to the story. Emil has come to consider himself a composer. He is feverishly thirsty for fame, but he has decided to win the people's hearts with his dodecaphonic compositions. His musical style is based on a dazzlingly modern geometric symbolic system of harmonies, which has nothing to do with the music of the rest of the civilized world. To the human ear, it sounds like an unbearable noise. Emil regards tonal traditional music as embryonic, mind-numbing lullabies, or music for amoebas. He sips the spirits drop by drop and smashes the bottle on the deck. "Millions love me," he cries, delirious, and throws his hands in the air towards the Pale. The publication of the book was facilitated by a controversial Estonian writer, Kaur Kender, who also later invested in the development of the game. They were all pretty pessimistic about developing a game in Estonia, but the results seemed like the stars themselves aligned. This book is strange, it's curious, it's the author and the editing team could certainly put more effort into making it more legible. It's not super satisfying to go through it and decipher it on your own, but thankfully we have a whole community of people doing it together and a literal encyclopedic voice in the game to help guide us. In February 2024, the Zaum studio laid off the last writers that worked on Disco Elysium, and in 2022 they laid off most of the original team, including Robert Kurvitz, which is also linked to the dissolution of the Zaum Cultural Association, as mentioned in the Martin Luiga's blog. We, as the community, can only hope to hear from its creators in the future and encourage them with our enthusiasm when the time comes. A false promise in the book, but a hopeful one in the game. Un jour je serai de retour près de toi. One day I will return to your side. Un jour je serai